This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
We are coming off of a fantastic sports weekend with UFC 300 and the Masters, of course NASCAR in Texas too, but it doesn't let up because the NBA play-in tournament is now set to begin tomorrow night. A lot of fun there. We're going to break down the way the seeds break down each team's odds to make the playoffs, where we see value over FanDuel Sportsbook and Tuesday's games by talking to Tom Vecchio today, getting his read on this year's play-in. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sanas. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as mentioned by Tom Vecchio. Check him out on Twitter at Tom_Vecchio1. Tom, pleasure to have you on for today. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah. Crunch time is finally here for these teams. Really interesting set of games on both sides. I think the West is a little bit more interesting compared to the East. I think we all know who's going to be probably coming out of the East. The West, a bit more of a toss-up this year.
And there are a lot of fun teams in the Western Conference play-in as well. So we'll talk about that, talk about whether any of the lower seeds can advance and what we've learned from past play-in tournaments as well by talking to Tom for today. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. Coming up later on this week, NFL draft thoughts via Connor Allen of 4for4 Football. We're going to talk to Tom on Friday about the Stanley Cup playoffs once those are all set. Later on this week, all of Dinger Tuesday thoughts tomorrow here on the show. So good week here on Covering the Spread, and make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on the FanDuel YouTube page and over on FanDuel TV Plus. Now, Tom, we'll talk about this year's tournament here in a second, but we've had a couple iterations of this NBA play-in tournament, and I wanted to ask you, what have been the key takeaways from those initial couple of tournaments that you want to apply to betting this year's event?
The takeaways are that we're probably in for a lot of unders, and that's the trend that we've seen for most of these games. And when I'm looking at the spreads for these first four games, my initial takeaway was unders in 3 of 4 of them. And that's kind of not necessarily an exact trend that we've seen, but most of the games, if we look back over the past few years, are rather low scoring. So just I'll run through some of these quickly. In 2022, 109 to 104, 113 to 103, 115 to 108. Relatively low scoring. Then there's one big game at 132 to 103. And we saw the same thing last year where it's 108, 102, 105, 116, 105, 109, and then 123 to 118. So I think, when push comes to shove, I'm going to be leaning on the unders. And that one game to go to the over would be Atlanta and Chicago, just because there's a very clear lack of defense when it comes to the Hawks. So I want to start with unders with a lot of things. And that may not be the most exciting, but this is like prime basketball. This is like the high intensity basketball that we actually want. Everyone talks about, the regular season's too long. How do we talk about a game in the middle of January and a Tuesday? How do these players get motivated for that? This is the time to be motivated. This is the time for tough defense. Every possession counts, more rebounds, lack of scoring. Like, this is the most exciting time. So lots of unders to start things off.
Now, obviously, bookmakers know this too. When you look at the totals for the opening couple of games, we'll dig into these specifically here in a bit, but 225 for Lakers-Pelicans, 223.5 for Warriors-Kings, 207.5 for Heat and 76ers, and then 218.5 for the Hawks and the Bulls. When you look at those numbers, just first glance, Tom, do you think that bookmakers are fully accounting for the intensity here, or is there potentially still more value towards siding with an under?
I think it's obviously been accounted for. Again, if this was a regular season game in December or January, Golden State Kings would be in the 235 range. It would be much higher. I've talked about the Warriors before. They've kind of gotten better on defense as the season goes on. And again, with Miami and Philly, would that be up at 240 in the regular season? No, but that would be at like 215, 216 area. So that's definitely being accounted for. I think you could potentially take live overs. That's a whole different conversation. If some games start off really, really slow, it's like these teams aren't just going to end the game 85 to 82. So you could take some live overs, but that's a different story. So I would side with unders initially, maybe take a live over in Golden State, Sacramento, maybe find a middle, whatever it might be.
Okay, so check out the totals, see if there's value on the under towards you, because as Tom has seen in the past, it does seem like the intensity does ratchet up here for sure. Now let's talk about some of the specific matchups here, beginning in the West, where the top two seeds are the Lakers and the Pelicans. They'll face off in the first round, or first games on Tuesday. Lakers minus 550 to advance to the playoffs, and the Pelicans minus 450. You can bet the yes or the no side for all these teams at FanDuel Sportsbook. Tom, when you look at the markets right now to make the playoffs for the West, any values to you at FanDuel at the moment?
The value right now would be going with Sacramento. They have the longest odds, and it really comes down. This is, everyone's got to make the decision. Do you think the Warriors have run their course? Do you think this is the end? Or do you think that, experience that they have for a decade of being in the playoffs and their core veterans, do you think that's going to cause them to get, or do you think the Kings learned enough last year by losing to the Warriors, blowing that lead? Because if the Kings make the playoffs, that means they have to, win the game one against the Warriors and then win a second game. So there would be value on the other side of taking a no for either the Lakers or the Pelicans. So it's honestly a personal question. Do you think the Kings have learned enough over this past season to overcome the Warriors? So I do. I think they do. So my spot would be the Kings. I would put like a quarter unit on plus 390. I think this is a good spot to target them. Whether or not it's the Pelicans or the Lakers they end up playing against, it, that's a very, very tough matchup, as we would see with this 1 point spread. So I would start with the Kings to make the playoffs.
What makes you think the Kings have learned and have the ability to beat this Warriors team? We'll talk about that game in a second, the specific game in a second, but what gives you the faith that they are a different team now than what they've been in the past?
So it's tough to say. Like last year, they beat teams just because they would run up the score to 140. And, this year I want to say that, like, you have to learn to win in different ways. You can't just win every game 140 to 130. You have to learn to win games like 120 to 115. So, like, when you go through that process of, like, you have to play better defense while still being efficient on offense, because you can't just give away everything on defense and let them score 130. That's part of that has a lot to do with it. Also losing Malik Monk isn't the best for them overall, but just I'm not confident in the Warriors time and time again. They wouldn't be in the spot if they were like some overwhelming favorite.
Okay, so we'll talk about that Tuesday game here in a second between the Kings and the Warriors, but Tom does like the Kings plus 390 to advance to the playoffs in the West. In the East, it's the Heat and the 76ers who are the top two seeds. 76ers minus 1,800 to advance. The Heat are minus 590 right now at FanDuel Sportsbook, so obviously that game between the Hawks and the Bulls is going to decide who gets a second shot here as well. When you look at the East, Tom, any value stand out to you there?
As of now, it's probably no.
Okay.
It's like you said, the Heat and the 76ers, they both get two cracks at it to make the playoffs. Like I said at the top, I think everyone probably assumes we know how this matchup's going to go. One of these teams wins, they move in, they have a second shot. They're both clearly better teams ahead of the Hawks. I would take either of these teams very clearly ahead of the Hawks. The Bulls, it'll be a closer matchup, but if Philly somehow loses this first game, I don't think anyone's going to be on the Bulls too much ahead of Philly, especially with Embiid back playing a full complement of minutes. So the East is really straightforward. As I said, the West is far more interesting. So the East is kind of a stay away until we get the matchups for that real first round.
So I want to ask you about the Embiid thing, because it was a bit of a surprise he didn't play yesterday. Is that a red flag to you or no?
No. It's more of just they came with the win on Friday. Things were essentially locked up, and let's just call it what it is. And as a Nets fan, I can say this. There was no way the Nets were beating the 76ers, even with the 76ers B team. And getting him that extra day of rest, he can rest. So it was Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday rest, which is great for him, especially, after the injury. I'm not worried about that in any capacity.
Okay, so no value in the East as of right now, potentially some individual games at some point later on. Speaking of the games, let's talk about the first games which come up on Tuesday night beginning. We got Lakers and Pelicans right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. The Lakers are favored by a point in this game. Total is 225. What do you see in this game, Tom, in the 7 versus 8 matchup?
Like I said, more unders. Specifically, it's probably LeBron rebounding prop. It's at 7.5. When we're looking at this type of matchup, obviously a literal back and forth game with a 1 point spread. I already mentioned I love the unders in basically all these games except Chicago, Atlanta. And LeBron rebounds and assist prop is something I'm going to be leaning on. I'm not going to be leaning on any points props. I will say LeBron's point prop is, I believe it's 25 or 24.5, whatever his points prop is at now. I will be looking to take an under if that moves up to 26 or 27. I'm not sure what it's exactly at right now. It's at 26 right now. If it moves to 27, I'll take the under on 27.5. LeBron ending a game, a must-win game, essentially, borderline, with 6 rebounds isn't the route that the Lakers need. So that's how I'm looking at it. He's had great success against the Pelicans this year. He's averaging over 28 points. I'm not really worried about the points. I'm going to be looking at the rebounds, slower pace. They've kind of turned up the defensive intensity, especially over the last month or so. I was high with LeBron. Davis rebounding prop is, I think, just a bit too high at 13.5.
Right now, that rebounding prop for LeBron is sitting at 9.5 or 7.5 rebounds. Over is -125 for this Lakers versus Pelicans matchup. I want to go back to our discussion about the unders because, again, there are 2 paths to unders. There is slow pace and there is intensity, and there are missed shots, tight defense. Do you worry at all about pace here, or is it more about the intensity defensively leading to more mistakes, leading to more contested shots? Is that the reason why you tend to lean towards unders?
Yeah, it's the latter more than the pace. Like even with a slower pace, like shots are still going to get up. It'll still be at, even if they play super slow, both teams will be at like 98 or 99 possessions per game. So it's still plenty of opportunities for LeBron, and his experience. I think the advantage that they have down low, like Jonas Valanciunas has not been super solid for the Pelicans in the second half. I'm not going to be surprised to see Larry Nance coming off the bench for the Pelicans alongside Zion, who obviously is fantastic, but I will just take a rebounding prop in what should be a lower scoring game.
Okay, so Tom is on LeBron's over rebound, 7.5 the mark right now at FanDuel Sportsbook with the over at -125. Second game is pretty intriguing. We got the Warriors and the Kings right now, and we've seen this one move towards the Warriors. It was Warriors -1 last night. It's now Warriors -2.5. We talked a bit about this matchup earlier on, where it sounds like you like the Kings to advance, which probably implies some value on the Kings money line at +118. What stands out to you in this one overall, Tom?
So, like I said, I like the Kings to advance. I like the under. And while both of those are true, I still think it's going to be a very close game, as we've seen, the spread be here. I still think there's value on the Warriors side when it comes to player props. And that's going to be going to Draymond Green, who I know can be a tough player to bet on for a lot of people, because we're not only worried about the game overall, we're also worried about him getting ejected.
Sure.
Right. And he's been, I want to say, better in the second half of the season. He had great success against the Kings last playoffs. He only played 6 games of that 7-game series. He's a player that is routinely pushing towards either 10 plus rebounds or 10 plus assists. So it's the rebound plus assist prop for Draymond Green at 13.5. Again, I like the Kings to advance, but I still think there's value with Draymond at over 13.5. When we've seen some of these recent games, he's putting up 12 rebounds. And just based on the size disadvantage, when we're looking at Sabonis down low for the Kings, like Draymond has to have a big game. He has to play this part in order for the Warriors to have a shot. So I'm kind of, I don't want to say playing both sides here, because I like a player prop from one, but I like the other team to advance. But I'm just thinking about the game overall, where if I'm leaning on the under and they should be operating in rational fashion, Draymond's just going to do his thing as long as he doesn't get ejected.
It's wild that it's be such a big part of the analysis with it.
It has to
but
be.
I mean, like, that happens, that's part of betting, is that like that stuff can happen.
Yeah. Injuries, ejections. This is all something I don't want to have to take into account, but we need to, especially with a player like Draymond, who does have some history specifically against the Kings literally last year. So as long as he's on the court for 38 minutes, this is a very viable mark for him to get to.
Yeah. What could possibly go wrong?
But
we'll see. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So Tom likes Draymond Green over 13.5 rebounds plus assists at FanDuel Sportsbook. Over there is +106. That's in addition to the LeBron rebound number over 7.5. That is -125. And also on the Kings to make the playoffs at +390 for the play-in. That is Tom Vecchio. Make sure you check him out on Twitter at Tom_Vecchio1. We'll have him back with us on Friday to break down the Stanley Cup playoffs as those shake down. Tom, enjoy the playoff basketball until then. We'll talk to you once again Friday.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty. Again, find Tom on Twitter at Tom_Vecchio1. We're going to recap last week's recommendations here on the show from the Masters, UFC 300, and much more to round things out in just 1 second. But first, it is playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. What are you waiting for? Download the FanDuel Sportsbook app and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and Vermont. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700. Visit chaosgamblinghealth.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghealth.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Got to go back to the recommendations from last week here on the show. I haven't had time to go through this a lot recently because we've been very busy on our Mondays, but do have time for today. Let's begin things with the Masters. We have Brandon Gadula on to preview the Masters. Check out Brandon on Twitter at Gadula13. Of course, you can find me and Brandon on the Heat Check every Tuesday, talking that week's PGA Tour event on the FanDuel Research podcast feed. Scotty Scheffler closed things out at the Masters to get the win there. He was plus 450 to win, which was pretty short, but hey, it was short for a reason. So he got the win there. The outrights Brandon recommended were Xander Schauffele 14-1, Joaquin Niemann 28-1, Matthew Fitzpatrick 40-1, Tommy Fleetwood 50. Came pretty close. Tommy finished inside the top 5. Saad Theegala 50-1 and Russell Henley 60-1. So shout out to Scotty Scheffler for the big win there, and Fleetwood giving it a good run with the T3. The regional bets did go well for Brandon. He had Ben on to be the top Korean at 3-1. That was a winner there. On played pretty well. I was hoping On could have gotten me a top 10. He came pretty close, couldn't quite get there. Needed one more birdie from him. It was close, but a good showing from Ben On regardless. And he does win the top Korean market at 3-1. Brandon also had Ludwig Aberg as the top Nordic player at plus 135, and he almost won the whole dang thing. Finished second there. Really good showing by Aberg. He's a lot of fun to watch. He's a guy who says he's nervous, but looks like kind of a stone cold killer. So excited to see what he does going forward for the rest of this year too. But winners in both the regional markets for Brandon. In the round 1 bets, Brandon had the Denny McCarthy round 1 3-ball plus 110 against Cam Davis and Villegas, and couldn't get the win there with McCarthy. McCarthy, I think, shot a 74, so 2 over on Thursday. Cam Davis had to get around there, and that also ruined the Adam Schenk round 1 matchup against Davis. That was minus 110. So Cam Davis putting both those to bed. But good calls by Brandon on the regional bets. Again, Ben On, top Korean 3-1. Ludwig Aberg, top Nordic player, plus 135. We'll have more thoughts on this week's tournament on Tuesday on the FanDuel Research podcast feed and over on FanDuel TV Plus. We had Austin Swaim on to preview UFC 300. Find Austin on Twitter at aswaim3, and of course find him on the Heat Check as well for UFC every Friday, breaking down that weekend's card. In the big title matchup, we had Jamal Hill to win. The money line there was plus 114. Hill did get knocked out, though, so no win there. Other money lines for Austin went 1-1. He had Jessica Andrade to win at minus 140, and Sadiq Youssef to win at plus 120. Andrade did get the win, minus 140, won by split decision. Seemed like a pretty close fight there, but did get the win there at minus 140. And then Youssef was knocked out, so no win there. on the money line. Props for Austin. He had Charles Oliveira to win by knockout or submission. That is plus 240. He lost by a split decision there. And then Yuri Prochazka to win by decision at 6-1. He did win, but by knockout. So couldn't get the dub there, but did get the Andrade money line. Find Austin on Twitter at ASwain3. Other Austin was also on the show. Can't call him Other Austin. Senior editor at FanDuel Research, Austin Cass. Find him on Twitter at Austin Cass. We had him on to preview EPL match week 33 this past week. He had the over for goals in Tottenham versus Newcastle at minus 108. And that one went to 4 goals. I think Newcastle scored. I don't know. I remember tracking it on my phone on Saturday, but it was a 4-0 victory. So did get over 3.5 goals there. So winner at minus 108. Player props for Austin. He had Ivan Toney to score a goal at minus 135. Toney did not play in this match. So that one did wind up voiding. Get your money back on that one. So no bet there. Final one was Luis Diaz to score or assist at minus 115 in the Liverpool versus Crystal Palace matchup. But Crystal Palace won. They won that game 1-0. So no goal or assist for Luis Diaz there. Crystal Palace coming through the big upset now, giving Man City a pretty good run at being at the top of the table. Big upset there. So no win for Diaz. But check out Austin on Twitter at Austin Cass. Finally, for me, I had NASCAR this week at Texas. Talked about a couple of top 10 bets on the show for a pair of teammates. And they were both slow. Austin Hill 6-1, Austin Dillon plus 850. Austin Hill finished dead last, so no win there. Austin Dillon at one point during this race was being outrun by 2 cars that did not have right front fenders, and yet he finished inside the top 10. So Austin Dillon did cash plus 850 for the top 10 there. It was a chaotic race, but also based on past history at Texas and Charlotte, you kind of expect that. So I think I actually modeled it correctly, and it resulted in a win for Austin Dillon. Also had Chase Briscoe in the betting guide on Sunday over at FanDuel Research. So a good week overall. Kind of bummed because I had Michael McDowell and Zane Smith, both of whom had a pretty good shot to finish inside the top 10. Couldn't quite get those because of McDowell wrecked. Zane was in a bad spot as far as strategy. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., same thing. Really fast car. So I had some bad luck, but still cashed 2 of the 5, which I'll be happy about every time. Did get 1 out of the 2 here on the show as well. Austin Dillon plus 850 for a top 10 comes through for us here. That's all we have here for today on Covering the Spread. Back with you once again tomorrow. We're going to talk Dinger Tuesday bets over at FanDuel Sportsbook to celebrate that. Don't forget to follow Tom Vecchio on Twitter at Tom_Vecchio1 to find his work over at FanDuel Research. I am on Twitter at Jim Sana, so you can also follow FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your Monday bets. Enjoy the play-in beginning tomorrow. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow for Dinger Tuesday. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.